Hello comrades, this video is going to be slightly different than usual because I've officially reached 2,000 subscribers. The pace at which I've been able to reach this number of subscribers was just phenomenal. I think I'm right in saying that merely a year ago I had just reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and that for me was one hell of an achievement. But now to be on 2,000 subscribers, just wow. I wasn't expecting this to come so quickly. It's just so reassuring to know that these videos and certainly this channel is definitely out there and people are seeing it. It's also really good to know that I'm not the only communist around. Here in the West, communist forces are generally small and weak because following the People's Republic of China becoming revisionist, combined with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a lot of communists and communist movements in this part of the world have become very demoralized. It's just made worse by the fact that the bourgeoisie now feel as though they can kick the boot in, since we have been seeing criminal imperialist wars ravaging the southern hemisphere, the super exploitation of third world countries, and even very harsh austerity measures here at home. But to avoid sounding defeatist, I will say that the great thing about capitalism for us leftists is that it is endemic to crises because of its own nature of production and distribution. Why is this the case? Well, it's because crises create class consciousness among the masses. To top it all off, the fact that we are living in the 21st century has really given us leftists an advantage, since we can actually see that socialism has been accomplished, and we can look at the former Marxist-Leninist socialist states of the 20th century, which unfortunately were not able to make it to the 21st century due to a combination of CIA-backed coups, economic sabotage, and revisionism. However, by looking at the great things they achieved when they had planned economies, we can look at them as great examples to learn from. This is why the internet here is a great platform to build up that climate for such a radical change, because it enables us to reach a wider audience of young people who will repeat these great achievements if they put their mind to them. The fact that we publish our work here on the internet means that we are really getting involved in youth culture, which is a great step forward. This is why in today's video I will be giving out shoutouts as a big thank you. The shoutouts will consist of other communist channels, since there is actually a massive community of us here on YouTube, and there are also some very good channels out there who I think deserve that extra recognition, because not only are they good channels with informative content, but it's thanks to some of these channels that I'm basically where I am today in terms of my understanding of Marxist-Leninist theory. So let's get on with it.
Hello comrades, this is the Objective Socialist here.
First up is one of my buddies, the Objective Socialist. This is a pretty new channel, so there isn't a lot of content on there, but I would definitely say that he's going to upload more videos in the future. However, he's got a very interesting video on the Soviet Union's Gulag system, so if you're interested, I'd definitely check out his channel and keep your eye on it for any upcoming videos.
Hello all of you beautiful people there, mine's called Bethany, and we're on the Shit Liberals Say Reddit, because everyone loves a Reddit video.
The second channel on the list of doom is another good friend of mine named Bethanut. This channel is not an overly political one, since Bethanut mainly tends to upload gaming videos. However, one of my favourite videos of hers has to be when she dives into a subreddit dedicated to ripping liberals a new arsehole. This video in general is actually pretty funny, but it also shows how very misguided liberals really are, so good stuff. So, the third channel on this list is the Canadian political commentator and journalist Jason Unruh. This channel is a news channel, but from a leftist perspective, so it's good to have that when trying to keep up with what's going on in the world. However, I would definitely say that Jason's older videos are a bit better than his newer videos, because it's on his older videos where he has uploaded very informative content on China under Chairman Mao. He also has a very good video on Pol Pot and why he was basically an opportunistic piece of shit, and he has an interesting perspective on identity politics too. The only issue I really have with him is his position on third worldism. Jason Unruh basically argues that third worldism is this completely new thing, even though Lenin actually wrote pretty extensively on the phenomenon of third worldism. Despite this though, I'd say that his content is worth checking out. So number 4 on the list of doom is Benji. Benji's channel consists of the typical Marxist-Leninist content, which is brilliant in itself. However, he does have a very good video series called Prosperous Workers' State, and in these videos he basically does little informative slideshows of the Eastern Bloc countries. He also has a brilliant video called Why Don't You Ask the People Who Actually Lived Under Communism. This is a great video in particular because he has actually gathered lots of information from countries like Russia, East Germany, Romania, Poland, etc. and the video basically shows you how many of the people in these countries genuinely say that life in general was a lot better under socialism than what it is now under capitalism. And it essentially shows the nostalgia that lots of people in that part of the world feel for the days of socialism before capitalism was illegally restored in their countries. In doing this, he also pretty much debunks the most common argument made by anti-communists as well. So it's, yeah, good stuff. But I'd say my favourite video of his has to be his video which is titled Why Did People Flee Communist Countries? In that video he basically talks about East Germany and how West Germany was better off because they had money from the Americans, while the East had to pay war reparations to the USSR so that the Soviet government could rebuild their country after being left in ruin by the Nazis in World War II. But he basically goes on about how the Americans actually exploited this situation a lot and used it to carry out sabotage against the socialist Eastern Bloc, which led to the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961. So brilliant stuff, very informative videos, really worth checking out.
Hey guys, it's Mexi. Welcome to another video. I got a new camera, so hopefully this is gonna work out.
Okay, so Mexi's channel is a pretty interesting one, since her videos don't really cover theory or history, but Mexi's content consists of climate change and other issues like that. However, what I really like about Mexi's videos is that she does these videos on climate change from a Marxist perspective. What this basically means is that I guess you could watch them if you know next to nothing about Marxism, yet her videos and her positions on things would be a lot easier for you to understand if you're obviously quite savvy with Marxism. Despite this though, climate change and global warming is just being further exacerbated by capitalism's anarchic nature of production and its profit motive oriented nature of distribution. And Mexi's videos are on point when she covers this sort of stuff because she goes over factors of imperialism such as big Western companies engaging in the super exploitation of the natural resources of the Southern Hemisphere. So yeah, good content.
Good morning from the town of Vietka here in eastern Belarus. About 2 months ago I took a journey into the irradiated forests that surround this town. And there, in a small hamlet in the middle of nowhere, I met an elderly mother and her son. They invited me into their cottage and they shared the contents of their fridge with me. And so I've come back to the country to return the favour. So I'm now going to go to a supermarket, buy some essentials, buy some food, buy some vodka, and I'm going to travel back there into the zone to find them and return the favour. Alright, join me on a journey into the zone. Let's do it.
Next up is a channel called Bald and Bankrupt. This channel is a vlogging channel, but the content that this guy makes is just spectacular. In particular, my favourite video series that he uploads is when he does vlogs all around Belarus, Moldova and Russia. For those who don't know, Belarus, Moldova and Russia all used to be Soviet republics, so they were part of the Soviet Union before it got dissolved in 1991. But Bald and Bankrupt's videos really do tick tick a lot of boxes for me, because when he goes around on his trips in these countries with his GoPro camera, he visits all kinds of interesting places which are full of history, and he gives you basically quick history lessons along the way. These places include Red Army war memorials, cities, architecture from the Soviet times, and even the radioactive exclusion zone that stretches over much of Belarus from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster of 1986 in the Ukrainian city of Pripyat that borders with Belarus. And the most interesting thing here is that he manages to speak to babushkas who still live in the exclusion zone. The most striking thing about this guy's videos is that you can very clearly see when he travels around Belarus, Russia and Moldova, you can very clearly see how much these countries have kind of deteriorated because of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So it's definitely one of those channels where you come to realize that you actually learn something new every day.
We hear it mindlessly repeated time and time again that communism failed. Now, it's rarely actually thought about in detail. It's one of those buzz phrases people just throw out there. What exactly does it mean to fail? What does it mean to succeed? What's the actual empirical evidence? What did the people of these countries think?
The 7th channel on this list now is Tavarish and Demian. Now, this channel has some excellent content. In particular, my two favorite videos on this channel are Soviet Union, Democracy or Totalitarian, and another video that I really like is Socialism Has Worked. Now, in the first video, Tavarish and Demian basically explains how the USSR was very democratic, since it operated on the principles of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So he basically goes over the workers' councils and the different committees that were dedicated to different sectors of the economy, like education, healthcare, housing, and stuff like that. Really informative stuff. What's more is that he also debunks the many misconceptions surrounding Joseph Stalin too. So that is a very good video. On the second video, which is titled Socialism Has Worked, I personally think that's a great title in itself, because the common argument that you're more than likely to hear from right-wingers is basically, oh, socialism doesn't work, look at the Soviet Union. But Tavarish and Demian basically goes to town on these right-wingers by telling you what happened in the socialist countries was great, as he goes into great detail of how these countries basically transformed themselves and literally built themselves up from awful material conditions to countries that were achieving many great things for their people because of the fact that they adopted socialist planned economies. It's quite a long video, but it's brilliant stuff.
We hear the argument fairly often, but insert X socialist country failed, or socialism has never been successful. Honestly, it's a strange argument to make. Let's humor this probably real person in your life though. First of all, how would one define success?
Next up on this shoutout list is Hakeem. Hakeem's videos are very well researched. He has very interesting videos which really dive deep into theory, as well as videos covering historical events. What is also interesting about Hakeem is that he is actually from Iraq, so he has a very interesting perspective on the Middle East. On the whole, his videos where he goes into great detail about capitalism being such an inefficient system are great. His videos on Soviet history are great, and he even has a video series on his channel where he manages to debunk a group of racists, or as they love to call themselves, race realists. Above all, I think my favorite content of Hakeem's is when he debunks Jordan Peterson, who is basically a right-wing psychologist who knows next to nothing about Marxism. I would highly recommend checking Hakeem's channel out. It's very good.
Здравствуй, товарищи, это Polinkash, and today I'm going to be making a video about the current status of revolution in the informational era and what we are to do within the next decade or two.
The 9th channel on this list is Polinkash. Now, Polinkash is actually from Poland, which is very interesting, since Polish people, what you tend to find with the majority of Polish people is that they are generally pretty Catholic and pretty right-wing. This is really not helped by the fact that the right-wing government in Poland has actually been destroying statues dedicated to not just the Red Army, but also the Polish resistance fighters who liberated the country from Nazi occupation in World War II. This is also combined with the falsifying of history surrounding the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which the Polish government, along with the European Union, put forward a disgusting resolution which literally tried to stamp out the huge role that was played by communists in defeating the Nazis. As well as this, the Polish government has also been repressing Polish Communist Party members. So, as you can tell, Poland is in a bit of a mess right now. But anyway, the reason why I like the content that Polenkaj uploads is because his videos are very interesting, and they're also pretty funny too. If you didn't know, Polenkaj's channel is also home to something called the Big Brain University, where Polenkaj and a few others like the Finnish Bolshevik, to name a few, they all basically take the piss out of PragerU videos, and I find it really funny while also learning new things along the way.
One of the major criticisms of the socialist left is how sectarian it is. Indeed, if you look at history, you'll find that Marxist-Leninists, social democrats and anarchists are unable to get along. Now, why is this the case? Surely anti-capitalists could unite against a common enemy. No. The truth is that it is impossible for the different factions of the socialist left to unite, even though they agree on many issues. In fact, if a united front of social democrats, Marxist-Leninists and anarchists were to exist, it would require 2 out of 3 of these different political groups to abandon most of their principles and follow the tactics set by the dominant group.
Now, although this guy here is not really a Marxist-Leninist, the content that Democratic Socialist 01 uploads onto his channel is very good and really informative too. He has a lot of videos where he debunks anarcho-capitalism, he has a lot of videos on fascism and why it's more often than not a reactionary tool in the hands of the capitalists to save their system in a time of crisis. He has a good video on the Israel-Palestine conflict, as well as the US-backed right-wing coup in Bolivia that happened last year, and he also has a good video on the attempted coup against the democratically elected Nicolas Maduro by Guaido in Venezuela that happened last year as well. Very interesting stuff. Keep up the great work.
People too often overlook the importance of rhetorical discipline in political debate. This is understandable, as the quality of general online discourse has been declining over the past several years. But thankfully, you, a big-brain communist, will have the tools you need to combat common anti-communist logical fallacies, thanks to this compact compilation. Let's get into it.
Coming up next is Danov. Danov's videos in many ways are very similar to Polenkaj's stuff. This is because he uses a lot of similar editing techniques to Polenkaj, and while all of his videos are very informative, they're also pretty funny too. One of my favourite videos by Danov has to be when he breaks down why comparing the Communist Manifesto that was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and The Wealth of Nations that was written by Adam Smith is a horrible comparison to make. Danov basically shows how it's actually Das Kapital which is the best comparison to The Wealth of Nations, since the Communist Manifesto was a pamphlet that was published during the revolutions of 1848, which is why it's such a famous piece of work. Das Kapital, like The Wealth of Nations, is a very detailed piece of economic theory and discussion, and this is what Danov shows here. Another video of Danov's that I really like has to be A Communist's Guide to Logical Fallacies, and what he does here is that he essentially shows you the typical straw man arguments that are made by right-wingers, so very good stuff.
Hello everyone. Now then, what would you say if I told you that I knew of a very generous Nigerian prince who needed your help to move his vast riches out of his country? Or what if I told you I could sell you a magic brain pill that will make you smarter?
Now, Sean's videos are very interesting. They are mainly lengthy podcasts, however the content here is brilliant. He tends to upload response videos to certain topics, and he goes through different points in the videos that he responds to, but from a leftist perspective. He's done video responses to PragerU and other people like that. Really good stuff. Now I'm going to apologize in advance here because my understanding of the Korean language combined with my ability to speak it is not exactly brilliant at all. So if I do pronounce the name of this channel wrong, please correct me in the comments. But anyway, the next channel is Phuong DPRK Daily. This is a pretty good news channel in itself, since it helps those who want to know more about what goes on in the DPRK know a bit more about the country, because the channel shows extracts from the DPRK's television service. This channel includes translations from Korean to German, as well as from Korean to English. On top of that, this channel also has helped me a bit when it comes to understanding North Korea's socialist system, because I do find it to be quite complicated. So, great content. Next up on the list is Juche Gang. I find this channel to be great for me personally because I really want to be able to further my understanding of the ideology of Juche and where it sort of differs from the former Marxist-Leninist states of the 20th century. Because as far as I am aware, Juche stands out as kind of like an application of Marxism-Leninism. So this channel basically does crash course videos on the ideology of Juche, which I find very informative. Great stuff.
Hi, I'm Florence. Today's video is on communists and why do they build states?
Up next is Matt Florence. Although he mainly covers history topics, he does have some theory stuff on his channel too. Matt Florence hasn't really been uploading anything on his channel lately, which is kinda strange, but I'm sure he'll hopefully upload more videos in the future. Matt has some very good videos which go over and debunk the classic propaganda that gets used against the DPRK. He has a very good video on the Malayan emergency, which was basically when the British Empire engaged in the systematic murder of communists in Malaya when they were trying to fight for their independence. He also has a very good video on the Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe, and that was essentially when Israel began colonizing and taking over Palestine with its apartheid regime. But what I like about the content that Matt Florence puts out there is that he kind of simplifies the facts without dumbing them down. He basically talks about Marxist theory and history in a way that someone who is not very savvy with that kind of stuff would easily understand. Of course, if you understand Marxism, then that's a bonus, but anyone can watch these videos and learn a lot of new things.
Dialectics. If you've read any Marxist theory, you've probably heard this term before. It comes up frequently and appears to be central to Marx's method. Because Marx never laid out a comprehensive text on dialectics, there are many different approaches and interpretations of the Marxist dialectic.
So, the Marxist Project is a channel that I've recently just come across after getting a recommendation from a friend of mine. Their content really doesn't disappoint me because the videos on this channel are basically crash course videos about Marxist theory and Leninist tactics and teachings. It's very good for people who are quite new to Marxism. This channel is also good for like recapping in case you are like me and your memory isn't exactly brilliant a lot of the time. I am a human being after all, but having that informative content that I can look back on to further validate my points or positions on things, it's a big help.
You know our party's newspaper, the organ is called Proletarian, and it's my pleasure now to call Jyoti Brar from the editorial board to come and address you.
Thank you very much, comrades. Follow that.
Now, Proletarian TV is a channel that I'm no stranger to. It is the YouTube channel which belongs to the party which I'm relatively quite close to, which is the CPGB-ML, or the Communist Party of Great Britain Marxist-Leninist. Now, this party has been facing some criticisms lately on its stance on identity politics, and has been accused of being transphobic. However, identity politics, when it comes to combining it with class politics, it's a very complicated subject because there are a lot of differences and there are also a lot of overlaps too. Identity politics, from what I'd understand it to be, is politics surrounding identity rather than ideology. So basically politics surrounding someone who is black or white or gay or transgender, etc. The problem with identity politics is not identity politics itself at all. The problem with identity politics is liberalism, because liberals ignore class. As Marxists, we should support equality for everyone, but not just in terms of identity, but also politically and economically, which is why we bring class into it. Liberals don't do that. They would just take someone who's gay, someone who's black, someone who's a woman, and just ignore the rest. They don't look at the class issues and see that even though these identities face specific kinds of oppression, when it comes to class and the hegemony of capitalism, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, straight, gay, trans, a man, a woman, etc. Not everyone is on the same boat, and the struggles that they face only go so far. Basically, a woman who is a worker or a homosexual who is a worker, their class struggle is no different to that of a straight man who is also a worker. But a woman who is a worker and a woman who owns like a giant multinational corporation and she exploits workers, in terms of class, they're not in the same position exactly. I think I'll make a separate video on this which will go into a lot more detail. But anyway, Proletarian TV is where all the meetings of the CPGBML that have been recorded then get uploaded. They oppose the European Union, which I do agree with. They talk a lot about the Labour Party and why it's not a party for the working class. However, the only real issues I have with them are their support for modern day China and their opposition to Scotland being independent from the rest of the UK, since China is one of the biggest imperialist powers right now that rivals the US, and Scotland going independent would really fuck with the British capitalists. Other than that, the content that they have is great.
Hello comrades, it's the Finnish Bolshevik.
Okay, so I've saved the best until last, and the final shout out is going to the Finnish Bolshevik. I absolutely love this guy's channel. His videos are super informative and very well researched. As a matter of fact, when I was just becoming a communist, the Finnish Bolshevik was one of the very first channels I came across. Now, I actually got interested in communism through studying GCSE history at school, and when we began learning about the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union, let's just say that there was a lot of Trotskyist propaganda involved. This is why I basically thought to myself, hang on now, I've really got to look into this. And as my interest grew, I was very lucky to come across the Finnish Bolshevik, because he has a lot of very good videos on the Soviet Union, a lot of good videos on Stalin, a lot of good videos that debunk Trotskyists. But alongside his history videos, the Finnish Bolshevik also has tons of very informative, theory-based content too. I find these very useful because when it comes to reading and writing, believe it or not, I really do struggle quite a lot. I've been like this from a very young age, which is why when I was at school, I excelled a lot more on subjects that were not so academic but more creative, like art or media and stuff like that. I've not long turned 20 now, but a pretty disturbing thought hit me a few months back as to whether or not I could be dyslexic. I say this because when I read something from a page of a book or from a screen, I do find it very difficult to process that information and get something out of reading it, especially if it's a long piece of text, since that's when I have the very obnoxious problem of forgetting which line I'm on when reading or misreading certain words or confusing letters with each other. Even like when I'm writing, I find structuring essays and even writing the scripts for my videos incredibly difficult. But to make it easier for myself, I tend to write as though I'm talking to someone who doesn't have a clue, while also obviously trying to avoid dumbing things down as well. When it comes to reading, I find that my personal preference is to listen to audiobooks, since I find it easier to process information when it's read to me. It's kind of weird, I know, but it's pretty much the only way I can manage to understand very complicated stuff like scientific socialism, other than opening a physical book written by Marx or Engels or Lenin. Instead, I find it easier listening to audiobooks of these works instead. I also find that collective reading is very beneficial, which is why I like the Finnish Bolsheviks videos so much. In particular, I really like the Communism for Beginners series, which are basically a series of podcasts that the Finnish Bolshevik has done on his channel, and in those podcasts he basically summarized the Communist Manifesto, the foundations of Leninism, and left-wing communism and infantile disorder. I find this podcast series very helpful. I've downloaded every single podcast and I found them very beneficial, since the language that Marx and Engels use, in particular, is quite outdated and quite hard to understand. And for someone like me who kind of struggles to read anyway, it's a fucking nightmare when you've got to deal with that. So next time you think I'm just listening to music on the bus, I'm actually just educating myself on Marxist theory. The thing is, when you're trying to educate yourself on Marxist theory, if you don't understand something, there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking someone to explain something to you, or even going on the internet and looking it up for yourself. This is why the Finnish Bolshevik ticks a lot of boxes for me, because his videos do explain a lot of things to me which before I had no understanding of, and it gives you that little moment where you kind of go, oh yeah. But anyway, the Finnish Bolshevik has possibly one of the best channels out there, because he explains things to you in a very particular way that is easy to understand, and for me, his explanations of things, I understand them with a click of a finger. The most wonderful thing about this, though, is that while the Finnish Bolshevik makes things very easy to understand, he doesn't dumb things down either. In fact, he keeps his videos very detailed and thorough. So anyway, comrades, that was the shout-out video to celebrate 2,000 subscribers. I want to thank everyone who has subscribed. I hope you find this content informative, and if you get the chance, I will leave links to these channels that I've mentioned in this video in the description, so you can go and check them out.